We're so back. So this video is going to be a supplement to my video on the film adaptation of Dragon Quest V. If you haven't watched it yet, that's okay. I'm a patient girly. I'll be here when you get back. Has that ever worked? So, Dragon Quest Your Story had the pretty trialing task of condensing a 30-ish hour game into around an hour and 40 minutes. And overall, I say they did okay, besides that existential crisis that they called an ending. But today I want to talk about how it stands up against the original game and the deviations that they took. I tasked myself with replaying Dragon Quest V for the third time to get all the footage for this video, which wasn't really that much of a task because I used an XP multiplier. I'm not going to ramble this intro, so we're just going to get a mosey on. Firstly, in the movie, Willbrook is depicted as this snowy, wintry village when it's not at all that in the game. It's just your very basic small town. I don't know why they went with this option in the movie, but I'm just going to go with creative license. It's also worth mentioning that the hero in the game doesn't know what actually happens to his mother. In the film, it's pretty much said in the opening that the hero's mother was kidnapped by monsters shortly after his birth, whereas in the game, the hero believes that she died of an illness shortly after birth. He doesn't really figure this out until Pancras admits it when he's dying. By the way, I'm going to be referring to the hero as just Hero. I know his name is Luca in the film, but for continuity's sake, we're just going to call him Hero. Hero's encounter with his future self is pretty much the same in the movie and the game, except in the game, the future self and the younger self are wearing the exact same outfits. So when I played the game, it made it pretty obvious that there was some kind of wibbly wobbly time feckery going on. He also doesn't give you any marriage advice, so your interaction with him is incredibly brief. In the film, the hero's childhood is just kind of covered very briefly, whereas in the game you get a lot more of the hero's childhood, where you see that he's a lot more rebellious. He's very often running off when Pancras tells him to stay put and getting up to all these little adventures of his own, despite being 6 years old, but whatever. In the game, you get an awful lot more background of the hero's friendship with Bianca. She's in your party for a really good while. Okay.
Okay.
I will execute you. Bianca's in your party for a good while when you're exploring up to 10 towers. The hero starts hanging out with Bianca when Pancras and Hero visit Bianca's father in Brownbeck to give him medicine. Pancras catches the same bug that Bianca's father has and he ends up on bed rest, which leaves the hero and Bianca to go out at night exploring. That's how they end up at Up to 10 Towers. Up to 10 Towers is such an incredibly fun sequence in the game that they didn't really cover in the movie, which was a bit disappointing. There's all sorts of mishaps that happen to the hero and Bianca in Up to 10 Towers, such as Bianca getting kidnapped by ghosts and entombed, basically buried alive unless the hero rescues her, as well as the pair literally getting served as a meal to the ghosts. It's the first dungeon of the game, so you develop this great connection with Bianca, which is the main reason it becomes kind of a no-brainer to most players to marry her later on in the game. As for Harry, you get a little bit more time with him in the game. He is in line for the throne and the king has found out that he is dying soon, which is why he calls Pancras and Hero into Coburg in hopes that they could put some manners on him. Harry has a stepmom and a stepbrother who hate him. His stepmother is actually the person who arranges Harry's kidnapping, whereas in the film, there is no stepmother or stepbrother. In the movie, it's sort of implied that Ladja's the one who kidnaps Harry. Harry's biological mother died when he was very young, and he acts out and plays cruel pranks as kind of a coping mechanism. He is a little terror, and this leads to Pancras actually slapping him in the video game, which they did not put in the movie for, I'm assuming, obvious reasons. It's Pancras' death and Harry's enslavement, which kind of transforms Harry's personality. You see this character development in the game where he becomes very mature and noble. Harry also teaches the hero how to read throughout enslavement. In the game, Pancras never taught the hero how to read, and he also did not teach him stranger danger. The main point is, what's not covered in the film is that Harry's character development leads him to become so brave that he intervenes in the abuse of Maria. I still can't believe Maria's not in the movie. They did my girl so dirty by cutting her out. I know it was probably because of time constraints, but I loved Maria so much in the game and I was so sad when she wasn't appearing. Maria in the video game is also a slave at Mount Azimuth who ends up there for betraying the Order, and she is subject as a result to regular savage beatings, which is another thing cut from the movie. The sheer brutality of their treatment at Mount Azimuth. They are constantly whipped and starved for 3 days at a time. When Harry and the hero see Maria getting another savage beating by 2 guards, Harry says enough is enough, and the 2 of them intervene and beat up the guards. This causes both of them to be thrown into a prison cell, but another guard lets you out, revealing himself to be Maria's brother. To thank you for helping his sister, he brings you to a barrel to help you escape with Maria. In the film, instead, because Maria's not there, Harry and the hero just smear fecal matter on each other to play dead to end up in the barrel. It was a choice, for sure. In the game, the whole barrel escape sequence is a lot more darker than the film. You don't simply just land into town and land into the carriage of Dr. Reagan like you do in the film. Instead, they float away into the ocean, and the 3 of them are just cramped together in this tiny barrel with no food for what appears to be days or even weeks. They end up washing up on the shore of a church called Heavens Above Abbey. When the hero wakes up, he told that he had been comatose for days. It's kind of brutal. I understand why it was probably cut from the film. It didn't really match the whole DreamWorks vibe they were going for. You don't actually encounter Dr. Agan until way later in the game. He's kind of present very early on in the movie and he becomes kind of an instrumental character. He doesn't really become prevalent until like Act 3 of the game. After Hero and Harry escape Mount Azimuth in the video game, they end up back in Wheelbrook together, which is now in shambles with no inhabitants. And instead of the hero finding a diary at the bottom of his childhood home, he ends up going into a cave and finding a secret lair that his father had built for himself, and there he actually finds a letter addressed to the hero asking him to continue the search for the heavenly hero. As well as this, it's important to note that in the game, the hero is not a descendant of the Zenithians. He's actually a descendant of a town called Lofty Peak. The hero's mother did have these strange powers that Pancras could never understand. Pancras also had found the Zenithian sword himself. It's not a Mostro Ferrato like it is in the film. You just find it in the bottom of this cave. The hero can take it with him and he can try and equip it, but you very quickly learn that he can't equip it because he's not the heavenly hero. The way they do this in the game is way more of an anti-climax than it is in the movie. I actually prefer how they do it in the movie because the movie has a great way of subverting your expectations by pushing this trope of, oh, the protagonist is the chosen one, where there's this big reveal that he's not. Whereas in the game, it isn't even really called into question. I think the movie made it a much more interesting arc. Also in the movie, Harry and the hero part ways because Harry wishes to return to Coburg to tell his father about Lodge's evil plan. By the way, those who played the game, did you also do a little yikes when he said that line, because Harry doesn't know that his father's dead, which I'm assuming he's dead in both the game and the film, because why else would he call Pancras and the hero to Coburg? It's left kind of open-ended, and I think that was intentional. In the game, Harry also didn't know his father was sick until he was enslaved, so I don't know. You also discover in the game that the reason Wheelbrook is in shambles is because a monster taking the place of Harry's stepmother has ordered for Wheelbrook to be burnt to the ground. So you can't stay in Wheelbrook at all in the game because it's in shambles. And obviously you won't reunite with Sancho until much later. It's a lot more somber, but I do think it's nice how the movie kind of lets the hero reconnect with his childhood home, and you get to see so much more of Sancho's bubbly personality. But don't worry, Sancho cries just as much in the game. In the game, Harry and the hero do a mission to save Coburg from the fake stepmother. You can also recruit Maria again to help you with this mission, and that leads to Harry reconciling with his stepmother and stepbrother and taking up the throne as king of Coburg. And later on, he actually marries Maria and has a child with her called Kendrick. not that one. When Hero properly sets out on his search for his mother and the heavenly hero, in the movie we get this montage which is likely a representation of like the typical RPG grinding and monster recruitment. In the game, there is this monster recruitment system that was introduced for the first time, and it inspired lots of games like Pokemon. You can also recruit an actual Gertrude who appears in the film, but you can also recruit any monster, and I'm pretty sure you can name them whatever you want to. As well as this, your reunion with Percy goes a little bit different in the movie than it does in the game. In the game, there's a town called Hay that, like many towns and villages that you get to visit in Dragon Quest V, most of them are unfortunately cut out of the movie for understandable reasons such as the time constraints. Crops in Hay are being destroyed by some mysterious monster, and a villager asks you and offers you money to go defeat the beast. You explore a cave and you find Percy in the bottom of the cave, and you have to battle him. He's technically impossible to beat, and he won't attack you unless you attack him. He won't fully recognize you. The only way that you can get him to remember you is by showing him Bianca's ribbon, which she gives you as a keepsake after up to 10 towers, and the hero kept it after all these years. This will cause Percy to join your party, and he has pretty great attack. If you return to Hay after this, town will accuse you of teaming up with Percy to extort money out of the civilians, and you're run out of town, essentially. Mostro Ferrato looks entirely different in the game. There's a good few changes that were made in the movie. First of all, Bingo is not in the movie. How could they? Rest in peace, Bingo. You would have loved... Actually, you would have hated the film's ending too. You meet Nera as soon as you arrive in Mostro Ferrato in the game, except she pretty much does not know who you are at all. In the movie, even though you have this exact same backstory, she cries when she reunites with you, and you're kind of gaslit to believe that the hero and Nera are like long-term childhood friends and that you're just missing context from the game. You're not. They don't know each other at all. Nera kind of remarks that she recognizes the hero's voice in the game, which is so weird because that means that 16-year-old Luca sounds the same as 6-year-old Luca, so he never hit puberty. I'm going off on a tangent. Anyway, you don't fight Bjorn for Nera's hand in marriage in the game, but you do fight Bjorn a lot later in the game. But instead, when you first get to Mostro Ferrato, you need to gather a circle of fire, a ring of fire. You need to gather a ring of fire and a ring of water from 2 separate dungeons in order to prove your strength. Rodrigo Briscoletti, Nera's father, also obviously does not have the Zenithian sword because you already found it, but he has the Zenithian shield. Wow, that's a tongue twister. But he has the Zenithian shield.
The Zenith... Oh, fuck.
Yeah. But he has the Zenithian shield. Nailed it. First try. After you get your hands on the Ring of Fire, you wind up in a town called Stockenbarrel, where you find out Bianca and her father, Whitey, moved there after Bianca's mother passed away. So when the hero first reconnects with Bianca, you spend the whole night at her house reconnecting, and there is only one bed. That's a Wattpad fanfiction in the making. Anyway, Bianca goes with you to get the Ring of Water. You return to Mostro Ferrato, and Nera catches on that the hero may have feelings for Bianca. For this reason, the hero decides to sleep on his decision on who to marry. That's the next thing. In the game, you actually get to choose who the hero marries. In the film, the hero just marries Bianca. In the game, you have 3 options: Bianca and Nera, of course. And in the DS remake, they added a new character called Deborah, Nera's spoiled sister, who is very callous and self-absorbed. If you marry her, she basically treats you like a slave and is very demeaning to you. For the purpose of this video, I'm just going to go along with the film and talk about what happens if you choose to marry Bianca. One thing that they left out of the movie as well is that you actually get to watch the wedding scene in the game where Nera is there for some reason watching you marry Bianca, and she's sitting on her own. Also, the wedding was entirely paid for by Rodrigo Briscoletti, Nera's father. He's literally the worst dad in the world. After the wedding, Briscoletti gifts you a boat and the Zenithian shield, and together with Bianca, the hero goes traveling. Bianca does become pregnant shortly after the wedding, and the hero is 16 years old at this stage in the game. I am judging. I am a hater. But this is where the movie takes an incredible amount of creative license as they return to Wheelbrook with Sancho, and Bianca gives birth to just one baby boy. The game is very, very different. In the game, you arrive in a town called Gotha and discover that Pancras used to be the king of Gotha. This is alluded to as the hero's last name in the film is actually Gotha. You do get hints at the start of the game, as when Mada is giving birth to Hero, they're in a castle and it's all very royal looking. Hero returning to Gotha means he is next in line for the throne. The hero undergoes an initiation ceremony to take his claim. Bianca goes into labor and gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl, which you can actually name yourself. It is in Gotha Bianca learns that she is Zenithian, but history repeating itself, monsters attack and kidnap Bianca shortly after the birth of your children, and you go to rescue her. And quite like the film, this ends in both the hero and Bianca getting turned into stone by Laja. The movie does a time skip of 8 years here, and so does the game, except instead of you knowing that Bianca is in Mount Azimuth and the hero is just in the snow somewhere, Bianca's statue gets taken away by a creep who has special plans for her at an auction, and you don't know where she ended up. And Hero, well, ends up being sold at this auction and planted outside some rich dude's house, where we get this tragically sad montage of what happens to the world over those 8 years and how it impacts the family living in said house. I want to take a minute to actually talk about this sequence because I find it weirdly profound. To me, this is probably one of the saddest stories ever told in a Dragon Quest game, and for a game that is typically so light-hearted and family-friendly, this is a really big tone change. The man who buys Hero's statue, Mr. Porgy, bought him to commemorate the birth of his son, Georgie Porgy. Dragon Quest. Mr. Porgy says to his wife he hopes that the statue would be a good luck charm. Haha. And welcome to Watch Mojo, where I didn't realize I wrote that.
Did you just Ron Burgundy yourself?
Time passes and we see this beautiful moment where Georgie takes his first steps and runs into his mother's arms. She calls for her husband and they share this milestone together. Another fast forward and Georgie's playing around the statue of the hero when monsters come and kidnap him. They're looking for child slaves as they're easier to abuse into submission. Georgie is taken away and his parents are devastated. Another month passes and Georgie's parents are still actively looking for their lost son. In a fit of anger at his good luck charm not working, Mr. Porgy loses it and knocks over Hero's statue, beating it repeatedly before storming off. The statue remains on the ground as we watch more years pass by with no change in circumstance. Maybe it's because as I get older, I feel the gravity of situations like this much more in media. I can't imagine being a parent and knowing my child is somewhere being worked to death and abused for years too. And that's where it stays for now, because when Hero's two children and Sancho arrive with Stolo's staff, they zoom away as Mr. Porgy watches, baffled mind you. But that's the end of their story. You don't find Georgie, I think. I haven't played the post game. Anyway, now let's talk about Dr. Agon. Dr. Agon appears pretty much in Act 3 of the video game, so I'm talking like over 20 hours in. He's there from basically the beginning in the movie as a pub owner who keeps Hero and Harry safe from the guards at Mount Azimuth after they escape slavery. In the game, you encounter Dr. Agon at the bottom of a mine shaft in a minecart that's been going around in circles. The hero frees him from this, and he tells him that he got stuck there 20 years ago, around the same time Hero was born. He speaks like Ned Flanders. He says diddly a lot. This is something that they did not include in the film, and I'm glad. Could you imagine that? You two are sure diddly stinky.
Not really.
Dr. Agon helps you find the old kingdom of Zenithia, which also isn't included in the film, unfortunately. This is where you go through the whole dragon orb discussion that's in the film, and he sends the hero out to find the fairies. Now, the fairies, their contribution to the movie is very brief. In the game, the hero goes to the fairy kingdom as a child, as fairies can only be seen by children. The hero teams up with a fairy called Honey, and together they retrieve a magical flute that brings spring back to the real world. Later in the game, the hero's children guide him back to the fairy kingdom. As an adult, the hero can no longer see the fairies. And that's when you go through the whole going back in time sequence, which plays out pretty much the same in the film as it does in the game. Except instead of in the movie where the fairies just flash you back in time, In the game, you jump through a magic picture to go back in time. And the in-game hero is even less concerned with stranger danger for some reason. The last part of the game is where the movie took a lot of creative license to condense the last parts. So in the game, after freeing Bianca and Mount Azimuth, Hero actually has to go through a portal to go directly to Naderia himself to take on the big boss. So nothing that happens in the movie after getting to Mount Azimuth really happens in the game. Hero doesn't reunite with Harry or Bjorn. I didn't talk about the Bjorn fight. I forgot to mention that in the game, the Bjorn fight is like amazing. It seems like it's kind of a side thing you do, even though it is kind of necessary. You go back to Monsterferato, Rodrigo Briscoletti asks you to go check an urn at the bottom of a tower. You find that the urn is burning red, so you go back to let him know. He brings you back up to another tower, and that's when Bjorn shows up, and he's big, he's bad, and he's Bowsy, okay?
He's Bowsy?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I don't know. But anyway, Bjorn is very cool in the game as well. I actually kind of like how they do the movie better though, because he's a bigger character in the movie and everyone loves Bjorn, so I had no complaints. Back to the end game of the film. In the game, the hero doesn't reunite with Harry or Bjorn, and he doesn't even find his mother at Mount Azimuth, just a weird side boss disguised as her. You don't actually find Mada until getting to Naderia, and she gets blapped by Ladja a few times. She kind of has her own little Boromir moment because she keeps getting up again before actually dying. After she does finally pass, you get this really cute scene of her reuniting with Pancras in the afterlife. And of course, the whole meta, it's all just a game thing doesn't happen when you actually get to fight Nimzo, which... good. Nimzo is such an awesome fight. Once you finally beat Nimzo, you basically return to the real world. Dr. Dragon thanks you. Then you get to fly on the Zenith Dragon's back all over the world to do a little victory lap. Then you have one last little Raven Gotha as the credits roll. Okay, a few more differences and things the movie left out I'll cover before wrapping this up. The addition of the Zenithian eyes. In the game, there's not a physical indication that someone's a Zenithian, but in the film, the Zenithians have golden eyes. I think this was a really cool feature to add. It adds a lot of definition to the characters of Zenithian descent, and I think that's pretty neat. Next. As I've said before, Mada is not a Zenithian in the game. The hero is also not a descendant of the Zenithians. Mada is a Loftinian from a place called Lofty Peak, just a place where everyone is kind of clairvoyant and they guard the gates to Naderia. One thing I would have liked to see in the movie is the flying carpet, or the actual Zenithian palace you can fly around the map in. I understand why they got the axe, but yeah, it's not that big of a deal. But that's about it. Let me know if I've forgotten anything, and if you made it to the end of this video, let me know in the comments what your favorite change in the movie was and what your least favorite change is. But for now, my name's Gronya, and I like Dragon Quest.